Good morning.
Morning.
It's good to be here again speaking. I like coming here. I like talking to you all. It's obviously fun to be with you. Hopefully this pandemic thing will go away and more people can come and say hello. So there's several that attend here, although haven't been here for a while, that I would love to see and say hello to. So peace be with you. It's a statement we hear a lot in the Bible. And it's the first thing Jesus says when he returns and comes back to his disciples. He then follows up and says, "Why are you troubled? Why do you doubt? Why do doubts rise in your mind? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself, touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see I have." So that's actually not part of my message today, and actually has very little to do with that up there on the screen, with selflessness. But as I was sitting there and Amy was singing Hosanna, he brought it to my mind, and I in the kind of brief discussion, I think it's a lot about, we have all this evidence around us, and we have all these things that he's done for us. Because I was having a little moment of, I don't want to call it self-pity, but self-doubt, and doubt of some of the things that I'd done in the past. And it was a reminder that he's real, and he's done things for us. From the time that he woke me up at 3 o'clock in the morning to make sure my wife is still here with us, to prophetically speaking and touching people, and time after time coming through when it really mattered. Not just in my little kind of, oh, I need this, or I need help, or I'm sick and I don't want to be sick, or those things feel very important to us because they're attacking our bodies, they're attacking our mental health. And so we get in this mode of self-reflection. And I think this message, that piece of it was not just for me, but for everyone to remember that he is faithful. He does come through, and I'm sure he has in your own lives at some point, even if maybe you didn't notice it, because sometimes it's very subtle. And sometimes it's a big, glorious event. And all of it is equally powerful when you start to see it and start to feel it and start to understand it. And so this moment where he comes in and talks to his disciples for the first time after having risen, and them kind of doubting that he's going to come back from the dead and everything, he's saying, look, why are you still doubting? You were with me through this whole time. He actually goes on to say, like, he asked for food, which signifies that he's actually still alive and needs to eat. And he's like, this is what I told you when I was still here. Why are you I've done these things. You were with me through this whole time period through my ministry, a pretty short ministry actually, if you think about it. You know, we look at ministry in times and seasons in the Christian community, in seasons of about 5 to 10 years. Jesus's was just a couple of years, right? It was short. And so, I think it was like 3 years. But he did all of this stuff. God worked all these miracles while he was here, and we just kind of, and we do the same thing, right? The disciples were like, well, this is just too big for him to see all these miracles, and then there's this one thing that's too big. There's always, the next thing is always too big. So we sit in our self-doubt and our self-pity and our kind of almost self-hatred sometimes, right? Because we don't like the things that we've done. We know they're wrong. Well, we know they're wrong because God's told us that they're wrong.
Right.
And so that should be a blessing in itself, because if you didn't care, then you're probably not saved.
True.
You haven't really met the Lord, because the Lord lets us know that these things are wrong. And in so, that's where the change starts coming in. And so it's just this interesting piece for me where he constantly reminds me at times, especially when I'm feeling insignificant, because we are to a degree, that he reminds me that I made you significant. and I've told you you're significant, so move forward. Stop stopping because you feel like you're not enough. You're not enough without me, but you are enough with me, and so I've told you that. Now it's time for you to step up and do what you need to do. So it's just an interesting word. It actually has nothing to do with my message, although it kind of ties in. So
Thank you, Matt.
I was sharing that. So, I mean, I could probably just stop right there. That's a pretty simple concept, right? The world is selfish. The world is all about, I shouldn't say selfish, because there's a lot of good people in the world that are doing good things, but good things for the right reason, or for the wrong reasons, and sometimes have bad outcomes. What I mean by that is, the world generally tells us things like, well, if people don't support you, they're toxic, therefore remove them from your life.
Yeah.
If they don't support what you're doing, or do X for your relationship, or invite you in for some piece of communion or unity, then therefore they don't care about you. So you need to take care of yourself. You need to get what's mine, right? I need to get what's mine, and then worry about what other people need. You need to take care of yourself. And so there's a lot of analogies there. People use things like, well, if you're on an airplane, this is what they ask you to do. If you're on an airplane, put your mask on first, and then help young children and the elderly. But I remember watching, recently I watched Dante's Inferno, or not Dante's Inferno, what's the name of the movie? That's the movie with the volcano.
Dante's Peak.
Dante's Peak, thank you. Close. I was reading Dante's Inferno not too long ago, so it's getting old. But the interesting thing there is there's a moment that really describes what selfless behavior looks like, and it's a decision in the moment, right? So if I'm on a plane with my 13, I'll go back to Dante's Peak in a moment, but if I'm on a plane with my 13-year-old, she can put her mask on. I'm sorry, 15-year-old. Ooh, she's gonna kill me. If that occurs, my son's 13, so you know they're born within like 30 days of each other, so I get confused because again I'm old.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah, right. I just started recently. I don't know if it's stress or if it's just I'm getting a little senile in my old age. So
Stop! I'm older than you. We'll pray for you.
thank you. I appreciate that, and maybe it'll go away. Not my memory, but the lack of. So
We're here for you.
Awesome. I don't need to help her with her mask, so I can put my mask on. If I can hold my breath for about a minute and a half, in a depressurized cabin, probably not that long, because there's a bunch of physics things that go on there. But asphyxiation takes time; it doesn't just happen. So if my little child's around a baby, a 2-year-old, a toddler, I'm probably going to put the mask on them first, knowing that I can get to mine soon enough. I may grab my mask to make sure I've got a hold of it, but the little lungs that are this big, right, need attention before my lungs that are, this big, and I've got 2 of them, right? So I can hold a lot of air. So it's a decision thing. We like to put things in a box that say, this is the right thing to do in this situation. And the reality is you don't know what to do until you get into this situation. And so it's about selflessness. It's about who's more important in the position. And for me, my kids are way more important to me. I would rather suffocate to death and make sure they live on than the other way around. I don't want to have to live with that. They'll find a way to live with it. So that's that. But the Dante's Peak, there's a moment when they're up on the mountain and they're going across this lake in this aluminum boat. And the lake is turned to acid from the sulfur and from the explosion and the stuff leaking into the lake. Well, at the bottom of the boat starts deteriorating, and near the edge of the lake, there's probably, I don't know, 50 feet left. They're trying to get to shore, and the people in the boat are the main geologist guy, the mother, and then the granddaughter, and the grandma. Or the mother's not there, I can't remember. But anyway, the grandma's there, the granddaughter's there, and I think the other 2 were there as well. But what happens is the grandmother, realizing that they're not gonna make it to shore before the boat goes into this acid pool and everybody's gonna die, she gets out of the boat and pushes the boat, because the blades got cut off the motor, they deteriorated as well. She gets out, endures the pain, and pushes the boat to shore in order to get everybody else there. And she ends up dying.
Wow.
She realizes that her age, she'd rather her granddaughter live on than her. She's already lost her husband, right? So there's this weighing of what's more important in the moment, and I think a lot of that has to do with the selflessness. There's this peace in us that comes from Christ that says, I don't have to be the center of attention. I don't have to have everything revolving around me. And I think in some ways there's this danger that exists in the church today, that we've created this almost idolatry around the pastors. And it's nothing, it's not their fault other than maybe an encouragement to maintain a large group or a body of people that then they feel they have to support. And then in supporting them, they often get stuck doing it alone, or feel like somebody comes up stage like me, comes up here and says something really stupid, and so then Amy, for example, feels like she can't have me here anymore because I keep saying the wrong things, and it's not biblical, or it's, whatever the case is. So then they start feeling like they have to do it on their own. We lift them up, and then they get stressed.
True.
And we see these pastors, even now, like the suicide rate among pastors right now is incredible. It's staggering to think about people who, for years and years and years, have been men of God, women of God, that are contemplating suicide, and actually some of them doing it. And it's scary, and it's because of all the pressure that the rest of us put on them. I say that I'm kind of a pastor, but
you are a pastor.
but we do this to them, and then we get all upset with them when they fall, and we put all this pressure on them. They make a mistake that any one of us would make potentially, and then we hang them out to dry for it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Watch the time a little bit because I do have a lot. Or at least I feel like I do. Most of the time I feel like I don't have anything and I go on forever, and sometimes I feel like I got nothing and it takes forever. So we'll just let God lead us through this. So the next slide. So the first thing to really talk about is that we really need to go back to love and what love really looks like. And one of the key pieces of love is in Corinthians 13, 4 through 7, right? We know this. We know this passage pretty well. I've taught on it a few times. I bring it up almost every time that I teach because I believe that all of the gifts of the Spirit, all of the things that God have for us is solidified in love. I mean, it's up on the wall over there. It's up on my wall at home. It's a reminder constantly. That's a different, thing, but that's just, empowering people and stuff. But the key over there, I wanted to take a big Sharpie because on that wall it says servants.
Yeah.
And I wanted to just sit there and underline it. And I was just sitting there staring at it. I wanted to take a Sharpie and just sit there and just kind of like circle it, star it, exclamation point.
Yes. Preach it.
And that's what you do in your Bibles, right? As you're going through, oh, that's great, you start, but I kind of wanted to do it on the wall for everybody to see it because that is what Christians are supposed to be.
Yes, exactly.
And we're supposed to be that in all situations, even if we don't like the people we're serving.
Yes.
Okay, so what does Corinthians say? It says love is not, one of the pieces in that is love is not self-serving or love is not selfish.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Well, let's say a simple example is the club that I participate in has a flight going on today, and there's going to be about 10 people going on this flight. That's something that doesn't happen every day. I could go, oh, Amy, I'm sorry, I got a cold, I won't be able to make it today. Because honestly, it would be more fun for me to do that. This is fun. This is a different kind of fun, but it's work, and it's we don't talk about this a lot. Like people that come up here and speak don't really speak on this a lot, but there's a lot of pressure up here. There is a lot of both spiritual pressure, stuff that's going on in the spiritual realm that most people are completely aloof to.
Yeah.
And it's not their fault, they're not like anything else, like with sound, I did that for almost a decade. You tune your ears, right? You learn to listen, and the same thing with your spiritual thing, it's something that has to be tuned, and you have to start learning what is and what isn't, and it's a process of that. And sometimes the Lord reveals it like that, and other times it's a building so that it's a building block of it. So there's all that pressure. And then there's just the pressure of your salvation right now is not necessarily in my hands, but it feels that way.
Yeah.
It feels like if I say the wrong thing, if I step over some boundary that is a sensitive point for you, that you might walk out, you might walk away. And that's a lot of pressure for somebody to be under on a weekly, daily basis. It's taxing. And so that is self-serving, or not self-serving, right? You're taking all of this pressure on in order to help people get into a relationship with the Lord. And you're sacrificing your own time, your own heart. Now, that can turn into self-serving if your goal is not here and your goal is up here. And by that I mean is if your goal is to continually get larger and grow, make yourself more known, and what happens is we start justifying it. Well, I'm reaching a lot of people for the Lord. I want to see more people saved, so I need to be bigger. The reality is the one is the important thing to Christ. So if there's one person in here that isn't me, then it's worth me being here. And the moment we switch away from that mentality, that's not, I don't want to say that big is bad. There's a lot of great things. I mean, most of the worship music that we listen to and sink into on a regular basis is coming from very large churches. So there's nothing wrong with large churches. It's all about why, right? Wrong things for the right reasons, right things for the wrong reasons, and either way is bad. The other thing is Mark 12:31, right? Jesus says for us to, the most important thing is for us to love our neighbor. If you know how I preach on a regular basis, I usually do it as reading a lot of scripture. Decided to do something a little different today. Not because I love doing it. I mean, if we wanted to, we could just sit and read scripture and we would get a lot from it. But I'm just kind of jumping around a little bit today. So Jesus says to love your neighbor. And then later on he describes, well, who is my neighbor, right? And this is my neighbor, right? Everybody else is my neighbor. And he talks about a lot of reasons for that. Where is that? That's in the next piece. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next piece, which is probably the hardest piece, I think. That's the hard one, right? Because you hurt me, therefore you deserve to, and sometimes justifiably deserve to suffer for it. Meaning, what you did was horrible, it was unthinkable, it was abusive, it was horribly damaging to my life. I've had people wrong me in ways that I don't wish on anybody. And so that piece is very a challenge for me on a regular basis. It's not that I don't try to do it, but there are parts of me that just, or if I see them suffering, like, there's that internal form or person that I am that just wants to kind of roll around in that I told you so, or you're getting what you deserve. You know what? If I got what I deserved, I wouldn't be here right now.
No.
I wouldn't be saved, I wouldn't be teaching, and I probably wouldn't be standing here because the Lord saved my life in multiple, like, physical, actual ways. And so I just praise God that He works on that in me. Because there is a side of me that is very dark, that is very vindictive and selfish, and I hate that side of myself. But I am glad that God has pretty much ripped most of that away from me, and it's taken almost 30 years of walking with Him. Sometimes it's instant. I've seen people they change and they're just completely different for the rest of their life, at least for as long as I've known them. So it's amazing things what God can do, and sometimes He does it quick, and sometimes it's a process. Why He chooses one or the other, I don't know. Maybe it's to demonstrate that sometimes it takes some time. so that people don't feel like they're not making any progress. I know a lot of people are like, well, I don't understand, everybody's happy and everybody's this, and I've been saved for 6 months and nothing's changing for me, and because they come into a body, they come into a church, and everybody's, yeah, hi, how are you? Oh, I had a good week. And the reality is then you go look at their social media.
Yeah, there's the key right there.
Right? You look at their social media and, somebody pay attention to me. Somebody follow me. Somebody look at me. And I like social media. I have some issues with it because it can be used to harm people. But you got all these people, they're joyful Sunday morning, or they're joyful when even not Sunday morning. Hey, how are you doing? I'm great. And then I've got the Lord going over here going, no, they're not. No, they're not. Stop it. No, they're not. And they're going through this right now. Well, are you sure? Oh, no, everything's great. And then I find out down the road that things weren't great, which I knew.
Yeah.
But I can't confront people with that, right? I can't go, well, the Lord said. It scares people. And then they stop talking to you. But it also, it's just, they're not in a position where they're willing to really confront it. And so it's not going to do any good. So sometimes you press them. Sometimes the Lord will be like, no, press them on it, because they're in danger or because they're going to do something harmful or whatever it is. So you'll get a press. But in most times it's, I'm just going to have to let it go. And I've called people like that I haven't talked to in a few years, and we were talking. I'm not going to say who it was, but I was like, hey, I came to you and I said, and the Lord was speaking to me at that time. Why did you not tell me? And their answer was pride. I didn't want you or anybody else to know that I was struggling with something, because it would make me look like less of a leader. And that's just not thing. And I think one of the biggest things that we have right now, as I'm turning to Luke 6, 27 through 28. A lot of Luke today. This kind of thing that's been put forward, that it's not okay to be not okay, even when you aren't okay. And I think it's harmful. I think it hurts a lot of pastors. I think it hurts a lot of anybody who's serving the Lord or just coming to the Lord, because then they don't understand why they're feeling the things that they're feeling. So what does that all have to do with loving your enemy? Well, sometimes our enemies aren't our enemies. We think they are. But Paul actually says that our battle isn't against flesh and blood.
True.
It's principalities, powers, spiritual forces of this world. Sorry, I can't find what I was looking for. There we go. And I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Let's see. Sorry, I believe you can have fun in church. I don't think you have to be all stuffy.
That's right.
Love your enemies. This is right after he's, blessed are the poor, right? This is through the blessings. And he says, but to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on the cheek, turn to them and offer the other. Someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. But of course, there's lots of places where he tells you to treat people like you want to be treated. And interestingly enough, I like to do this every once in a while, and that's if we turn to Leviticus 19:18. A lot of us cringe when we're like, ooh, Leviticus, right? But Jesus isn't saying anything that wasn't said back then. If I can find Leviticus, there we go. And 19. It says, do not seek revenge or bear grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbors as yourself. I am the Lord. And up above it says, do not curse the deaf or stumbling blocks in front of the blind, but fear your God, I am the Lord. Do not pervert justice, do not show partiality to the poor or to the favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly. Do not go about spreading slander among your people. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. Do not hate a fellow Israelite in your heart. So in our case, this would be a fellow Christian, right? Rebuke your neighbors frankly so that you will not share in their guilt. So there's a little bit of difference there, right? There's this Old Testament separation between the Jew and everybody else, and there's also this don't unclean yourself by associating with your enemies and that kind of thing. But the general message is you're also not to do harm to them. And there's this talk of, if the Lord says to do it, that's different, right? He's taken up his armies against any armies that are coming up against the Israelite and those kind of things. So it's a important thing. So loving your enemy looks like if someone harms you or says something bad about you, or in a practical sense, kind of wanted to get into a little bit of practicality today, just because often we don't when we're up here. And so it's probably the hardest thing to do, right? If someone came up to me and slapped me in the face, probably not going to let them slap me again. I might if the Lord said to, but it would be a very hard thing for me to do. It's just unnatural to let somebody do that, right? But I don't think that's necessarily the picture he's trying to paint. What he's trying to paint is we have internal narratives that go on in our mind, right? Well, Amy hasn't called me in a while. It's been like a week or 2 weeks, haven't heard from her. So she must not really care about me, right? There's this internal narrative that says, so then it becomes, well, she hasn't called me, and man, she was hanging out with Joy a lot last week. She hasn't called me at all. So then it's like, well, she must like Joy better than me, right? And we start deteriorating in our thought, and this is what Jesus really taught a lot against, which is he calls our minds. He actually, when he talks about how his disciples couldn't heal the demon-possessed boy that was throwing himself into the fire, he says, "Look," he's like, you corrupt generation, right? He's really talking about the actual language there in the Greek is about the mind. He's talking about a perverted way of thinking or a wrong way of thinking that's causing their problem. And we do that. Our minds, the human mind, so there's been a lot of psychological studies from a worldly perspective that say the human mind accepts negative at 10 times the rate that it accepts positive. So an example of that is Amy comes to me and says, will you preach for me this weekend? I'm using Amy because it's a safe example.
Yeah. Plus, I use them examples all the time, so it's my turn.
Right. Will you preach for me? Yeah, sure. So her thought of me. So if this is you and I talked about
yes,
this
we did.
a couple weeks ago.
If
This is, I hate your guts, and this is, you were the best. You were basically Christ returned. Okay. There's somewhere in the middle is where you start with somebody. Unless you've heard something about them, in which case you're going to form an opinion about who they are. They're called unconscious biases. There's a lot of talk about that today, currently going on, because of the BLM stuff and the riots and just the kind of people tired of people being mistreated is really what this is all about.
right.
And if you were to sum it up in one thing, people are tired of themselves being mistreated, their families being mistreated, the people around them being mistreated, and not really being treated fairly, even if it's unintentional. I'm not going to go into a whole political statement today, but that's really what this is all about. And it has to do with internal narrative, and it has to do with what I'm talking about here a little bit. So I had to kind of just touch it. So Amy's opinion of me is here. Ryan, can you preach for me? Yep. Ryan, can you preach for me? Yep. Ryan, can you preach for me? Yep. And then it levels out somewhere around here. I don't think we'll ever make it over there, but somewhere in here. Unfortunately, it does make it there for some people, and that's very, 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 very,
Dangerous.
very, very unhealthy.
Yeah.
Very dangerous too. I mean, that's how you got people committing suicide with a cult leader, right? It's, they raise them up to a point of deity, and that's dangerous. It's harmful, it's all sorts of things. But it's back here. So I'm back here, and I'm like, okay, we'll put the mic in the middle. That'll make it easier for me.
Okay.
So I'm sitting up here with Amy. The other mic is the, this hard weight. So I'm sitting over here with Amy, and then I say, she goes, can you preach for me? And I'm like, yeah. And I did do this once, but it was to help somebody else, so I think she understands. Because she did call me back, so that's good. But then I say, yeah, I can preach for you. And the night of, I call, and I say, you know what? I have a friend who was just in a car accident. I can't make it tonight. And this actually occurred. Now, I don't know what narrative went on in her mind. I think it probably was like, well, I'm going to have to teach tonight. Sucks, but I get it, right? I think that's what occurred. But a lot of time what occurs in a situation like that is she goes, that jerk. Right? And in doing that, I end up on this, I'm all the way over here for 1, 2, 3, like 4 or 5 times, right? And then all of a sudden, one time, and it goes over here. Not maybe all the way over here. So then, it takes me, I teach, and then it happens again. I teach, I'm kind of back to a neutral set, and then it happens again. Right? And at some point, it becomes very difficult for me in Amy's eyes to come back to center, let alone get all the way up. And this is something that goes on in our minds. It's actually been proven. And the Bible actually kind of talks about it too. It talks about reading, not prejudging people, not judging what they're doing and not judging their actions, fairly judging them when it is appropriate to do so. And so because of that, and this happens with everything, like with politicians, with famous actors, everybody loves them, they do something that is horribly wrong, and next thing you know, they're the Antichrist.
Yeah.
Because human beings love to do that. We love to put somebody up on a pedestal and just knock them off, right? So the point is these internal narratives are very, very destructive, and in the church, they actually cause gossip. And gossip is horribly destructive.
Super destructive.
Because most of the time, gossip will turn into this without the person that's actually being talked about knowing that this is what's going on, that Amy feels this way about me. Right, because she's talking to Joy, and she's talking to her mom, and she's talking to Brian? Brian? I just met you today, Brian. Brent. Me, I'm just close, sorry about that.
Okay.
With Brent, but she's not talking with me. And sitting down with me and saying, hey, I've got an issue with you, we need to talk it out. Why? Why do people do that? Does anybody really have a kind of a guess as to why people would rather talk to their crew than the person that they're mad at?
Confrontation.
100%. We are a non-confrontational society, and when we do confront, it's unhealthy. So, like, my opinion is that the riots going on is unhealthy. It is what it is, and it's the result of neglect, which we see in our own families, right? We see in our own relationships. It's not going to be any different in a large mob or a large crowd. You're going to have, the longer you let something fester, the worse the results are going to be when it finally does manifest into reality as a situation. So if Amy and I's relationship is under stress and I don't know it, well, you're holding me accountable for something that I'm not even aware of. If Amy's aware, if I'm aware, and I try to confront Amy and I say, Amy, look, I know you're mad at me, and something's going on. I feel like there's a lot, I hear a lot of kind of side talk, and I feel like it's directed at me. Can we talk about it? She goes, no, there's nothing going on. Everything's, I haven't heard anything about, and she knows internally that there's stuff going on. But now that becomes a problem, right? That's gonna tear the relationship apart.
Yeah.
And so now, if you put somebody who's your enemy, how are you gonna, under normal circumstances, get them back to center? And the way we get everybody back to center is we seek God. We seek Jesus. We ask him for help to do those things. You know, I hear this toxic thing within the Christian community that says, you don't have to pray for everything. You don't have to ask God about everything. I mean, you don't have to ask God if you're going to go to the grocery store today. You don't have to ask God if you're going to go hang out with somebody today. You don't have to do that. Those are just kind of givens. You just do them. You will never, other than to condemn it or to say it's inappropriate, you will never hear those words come out of my mouth. The Bible says to pray without ceasing. So prayer looks like, and that, what does that look like, right? So that looks like me going, Lord, do you want me to teach? And sometimes I wait for an answer. Amy's patiently, but probably frustratingly, had to wait for some of those answers, right? Sometimes it's a simple thing like, am I going to go to which grocery store am I going to go to? Do I pray about that? You bet I do. I absolutely do. Am I going to Walmart today, or am I going to Fred Meyer today? Am I going to Safeway today? Whatever. Why? Because God may have an assignment for me there. And if I don't hear no, like I'm going to go to Walmart, is that okay? If I don't hear a no right away, it's probably okay. I might get a no. Sometimes I'll get a no, you need to go to Fred Meyer, or you need to go here, or sometimes it's usually not that clear, to be honest with you. Most of the time it's like, no, I'm like, Fred Meyer? No. Safeway? Go to Safeway. Okay. That feels right? And sometimes one of the things that a good friend of mine, Gordon, talks about is God's peace. God's peace is with us. And one of the things that he did, and that actually I started using, because it's a wonderful way to engage with God, especially if you're unfamiliar with it. Most of us are familiar with the peace that God gives us when we feel it, right? So if God says, if God's peace is on you, there's trying to find the right word for it, because it's not, you know it, right? There's this knowing that God's peace is with you, and you're like, oh, that's what that feels like. Once you know that feeling, and a lot of us feel it the moment of our salvation, that peace washes over us at a moment of our salvation when we realize, oh, I'm horrible, but there's a way out of this for me. And that creates the space of, well, I know what God's peace is. And so what the instruction was ask God to take away that peace if the decision is not right. So if I'm making a really hard decision, especially like, should I come here and teach more? Should I, whatever that is, I am waiting for God to either give me peace on it, give me a clear message as to, yes, you should be doing that, or, because it's a very important decision, if I were to go anywhere for a long period of time, that's not a small decision to make. And so, or take it away. Like if I'm praying about it, all of a sudden I feel nauseous, I don't want to, it's just, no thank you. That's also a message too. God's taken that peace away momentarily. You're not asking him to take it away permanently. He's just saying, if it's not what you want, if it's not your will, take the peace away from it for me. And then it's actually really easy to make decisions. He uses an example of, they were looking at a house, they thought it was the right house. He got a word that peace was taken away from it for him. And same for his wife. It was a no-brainer deal as far as getting into a house for rent. It was no-brainer. Way less than an apartment, way more room. He's got 7 kids.
Okay. Mr. Wolf.
Okay, and they're living in a 2-bedroom, 1,000 square foot apartment at the time. There's this probably 2,200, I think it was around 2,200 square foot house that was for rent, that was cheaper than the 1,000 square foot apartment that they were living in, and they chose to walk away from it. And there's some things that they found out later, the person was real manipulative and all sorts of things. So God will protect you from those things. That's a really good exercise to get into. And as you get better at recognizing it, it becomes easier to kind of pray all the time about everything. I think there's a lot of bad advice that comes in dealing with these things. If I realize that I don't have a lot of enemies right now that I know about, I know there's people that are probably not happy with me right now, because their needs in a situation are being met. But overall, I don't really feel like I have a lot of enemies anymore that I know about, other than the enemy. And so when someone comes at me, it's easier. There are people that have hurt me that it's very hard for me to pray for. But it's interesting, you know, and I've talked about this before, and I think this is really the answer, and I think the Bible gives us the clue for the enemy, and then I'll move on, is that start praying for them, because the Bible does tell you to pray for, in that passage in Luke there, it tells us to pray for our enemies. Why? Because if I take, I'm trying to find, so I honestly can't think of somebody I really want to demonize in order to kind of bring it back. So John, I don't know, John's a bad word because that actually, and I don't have any ill will towards that. If you ever saw it, I thought that I did. So how about Billy Bob? I don't know a Billy Bob. It's probably a bad example too, just because of the situation. But anyway, so we'll call him Billy Bob. And they cheated me out of a bunch of money, and they did all these bad things to me. Whatever it is, they beat me up, stole my girlfriend. I don't know, a bunch of really horrible things. And I go into prayer for this person, and most of us are like, dear God, forgive them for being such a bad person. Forgive them for taking my money. You know, forgive them for, and it's all what? It's all the stuff that's on us, right? It's all the hurt that they're doing to us. But what you can do is you can pray for somebody in a way that is helpful. God, they are a son of God. This person is loved by you. You numbered their hairs. You're fearfully and wonderfully made. You saw that, right?
Yeah.
This person has a destiny. They have a path that you want them on. They have goals that will further the kingdom and bring people to you. You start praying those things over people. They are changers of nations. They are a light in the darkness. And you start speaking these things over their life rather than the death that you've been speaking in your mind over them. And something starts to change about how you interact with them and how you meet them in public, and all of a sudden you're not immediately just, but you're like, genuinely, hey, how are things going for you? Because you're wanting to see if God's changing their heart and if God's really moving them forward. And also, I tell you what, there's people that are serving the Lord in ways that I'm jealous of and ashamed that I'm not. And they were awful people. Awful, 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 awful people. In their behavior at the time. And so I think it's important that the love your enemy is I shouldn't say everyone, there are just some people that they're wired wrong, but that's chemical in some cases too. But the Lord says he died for everybody, everyone, the entire world, not just the people in this room, not just the people that go to church. There is a justice in the fact that you have to accept his salvation.
Right.
Because it would be unjust, because then the penalties for the things that have occurred would be unpaid. Your debts have been paid, and that's, I mean, you think about that on a lower scale. How many in here people are carrying more than $1,000 worth of debt? Okay.
Nobody's gonna be honest.
Right. So we've got. Let's just say you've got $10,000. Let's make it big. Let's say you got $200,000 in debt. And for some people, that's small. I work in a weird industry. I'm dealing with billions of dollars on a regular basis, and so some of these numbers are really starting to sound small to me. But then I look at my own account and I go, oh yeah, that's what reality is. But if I just came to you and you had $200,000 in debt, and I went in and I went, you're debt free, is that a big deal to you?
Yeah.
Right? So how much bigger? Did I miss something?
Yeah, I was holding my hand out.
Oh, you're like, where's the check? Okay, yeah. Well, unfortunately, I don't have $200,000. But how much bigger is it that I am not going to spend eternity in hell because that debt's been paid as well?
Yeah.
And we lose sight of that. We lose sight of the fact that we are free, you know, and it's weird because there's this thing that once you understand that freedom, then you can almost take it for granted, and that's dangerous too. So there's this balance to walking with Christ that's not always as easy as it sounds. It's very simple. The concept of it is very simple. You're forgiven. Accept the forgiveness as a gift. That's it. Walking that out and accepting it in here is really challenging.
Yeah.
And it's not easy. So simple and easy are two different things. We often combine them, but they're really two different things. Something can be simple, but it's very hard to accomplish. And that's not through our own works, but it's through a surrender of our mind and our will to God, and those things become more apparent. So love your enemy. It's a very hard exercise to do. Some of how we do that, I'm going to go to the next slide, is to serve others. I mean, what did our Lord do? We're going to go to Philippians 2, 3, 4. Actually make it the full right to 11:30 today. Apologize. That's too long.
No, we go to 12, so you're good.
Okay. I got lots of time then. I'll slow down.
Yeah, we got plenty of time.
I'll get into my preaching. If you just give a little, then the Lord will give a little more.
Oh no.
Sorry, that's actually not appropriate. Those people people that preach that way and teach that way, I'm sure work very, very, very hard.
Philippians 2? Philippians chapter 2?
Yeah, I'm just trying to, my Bible's kind of thin and I don't want my notes to fall out. There's Timothy, so that's too far. All right, where'd you go? There it is. All right, so we're going to read these a little out of order. That is intentional. So Philippians 2, 5 through 8. No, I have to bring this closer. It's not the light. Isn't working right for me. 2, 5. So, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. So I'm going to stop there for a second. If everybody around you was in a race, let's say a car race, and they were all driving stock Camrys, and you could show up to that race in a Lamborghini Murcielago, is it a fair race? Is it a comparative race?
No, it's not bad.
Is it something that you could use as a way to teach others in that to race properly if they're using different vehicles? Probably not, right? So God came down as a man to establish a level playing field that said, if you do what God wills, and if you trust in him, and you do the things that I do, you'll have the same things and more, because you've got more time than I do, that I did. He says that. He says, you will do greater things than me. So put that in your mind for a minute.
Yeah.
Think about what Jesus did. There's so much that Jesus did in his 3 years of ministry that it can't fit in a book.
Yeah.
They had to pick things. There's tons and tons of letters and writings that the Vatican has and other resources Smithsonian has that detail other things that he did. They're not considered canonical, but they make sense that he would have done those things. And so it says, rather he made himself by taking the very nature of a servant. The very nature of a servant being made in human likeness. So that's interesting to me. Not only is he a servant or a man, but he's made in a human likeness. He's a servant. So the human likeness is made to be a servant. And being found in the appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death. Even death on the cross. He became obedient to something that he was not required to be obedient to. So, if we look at our salvation in that way, we are not required to accept the gift of salvation. It is not a requirement. It is a requirement to be with God. If you want to be with God, God will not force you to be with him for eternity. Let that sink in a little bit, right? have to submit yourself to something greater than yourself or lesser than yourself in order to be humble. So in the sense of, I am not required to, I'm not in a position right now where I'm required to submit myself to anything Amy has to say. I don't work for her. I don't serve in her church other than to come speak every once in a while. I really don't have to submit to her. However, when I am in this house, a house that the Lord has anointed her to build, then I choose to submit myself to her authority, especially while I'm here. Will I respect her opinion when outside of these walls? Absolutely. I have a lot of respect for Amy, but I don't have to. Right? So those are humble choices, and especially when you think you're doing something right and you're doing it for the Lord, it can be very, very difficult to see your error in it.
Yeah, it's true.
And if anybody calls out an error on anything that you're doing, it's worth doing what? What does the Bible tell us to do with our thoughts?
Take them captive.
Hold everything captive to Christ.
Obedience of Christ.
To the obedience of Christ. So if someone says, hey, I get that you're trying to stand downtown on a soapbox and preach the Lord's word, and he's calling you to that. However, as a follower of Christ as well, I'm seeing a lot of damage being done by your words. And I realize it's not your responsibility necessarily how other people feel. Can you take a look at how you're preaching or how you're doing this and see if there is a different way? No, God's called me to do this. That's not humility.
Right.
That is pride. God called me to do it, so therefore I can trample all over everybody. What you should be saying is, let me think about that, let me pray about it, and really mean it, because there's this thing in the Christian society where people say, oh, let me pray about that, and they actually don't. They're just trying to get you off their back.
Yeah.
I would never do that. If I say I'm going to pray, I'll be praying about it.
That's me too.
But accepting correction, right? The Bible says that a wise man receives correction or accepts correction, right? It's wisdom to do that. And a scoffer or somebody who doesn't believe will not accept that wisdom. So it's important. It's really important to be humble. And that's what it's not a false humility. Oh, you know, so amazing. I know you think it's amazing how well God uses me, but that's not humility, right? Or another thing of like, you know, if someone came to me and asked for me for help for sound, rather than saying, I'm sorry, I really don't have time for it right now, and I say, well, I don't feel anointed to do that, or whatever the excuse is. Don't use God as an excuse. I'm not going to feel called to it. And I think there's importance in being called to things.
Of course.
But just be honest. If you don't have time or you don't, right? That's false humility. You know what? This church is too big. I really shouldn't be touching your soundboard. It's too much for me. When you know it isn't. Be honest with where your skill set is. If I walked into the church that I helped plant and not told anybody what I could do, is that serving God? It's a matter of, you're not always the expert. There are people that know more than you. There's people that know way more about that than I do, and I know quite a bit. I'm a decent, pretty good, above average sound tech, right? But there are people that are way better than me.
Yeah.
If somebody that I know has time in the game and really understands, and I can tell, right? I know that well enough to know when people are fake talking it or really talking it, that I will listen to what they have to say. If they come and say, hey, your mix is this, or you know, maybe you could do that, I'll listen, because they know what they're talking about. So that's humility too, but listening to somebody who doesn't know and just to humor them, sometimes it's good to save their feelings. Other times you may say, look, I disagree and here's why, right? We have to start being honest with people about what we're really thinking. We're always, Amy's feelings are not my responsibility. I should be concerned with Amy's feelings because I don't want to hurt her. But the way she feels, I cannot control the way she feels about something. I can't control the way any of you are responding or not responding to what I'm saying today.
Right.
What I can do is be honest about what I really believe, how I really feel. And I don't like the word brutally honest because I think honesty can be delivered with some candor.
Yeah.
But you should be honest. If I think what you're doing is sinful, then I need to be honest with you if I'm especially if I'm in relationship. I think sometimes people are honest with people about sin that probably have no right to.
Exactly.
They're not in a relationship and they don't have a right to speak into their life. But if Amy came to ask me about certain things and I felt like they were wrong, they're still their grace covers a multitude of sins. We just talked and read about that during prayer. So we have to find this balance because we can't recorrect to the center of our feelings for each other, let alone get to a Christian body that everybody, the Catholics and the evangelicals and the charismatics and the LGBT community that's now hopefully coming back to the cross with acceptance. You can't get back here into some sort of space where we can have legitimate conversations without being truthful.
Yeah.
And sometimes truth hurts, especially when, not everybody understands it the same way. There has to be a place, not only within the body of Christ, but within our society that says we can have a conversation and completely disagree with each other and not want to kill each other.
Yeah.
That's the important piece. We can't find middle ground. We can't find a happy place without starting, like, you're over here, and I hate using left and right, so I'm not talking political, I'm talking emotional and mental. But we can't so we'll go this way. We can't,
Perfect.
we can't come to some sort of middle ground or some sort of space until we start talking to each other in a real way. If I just give you a bunch of platitudes to get you off my back and don't have a real conversation about it,
Yeah.
then that's not helping you, and it's certainly not helping me understand your position. So we need to be able to get into a relationship, start trusting one another, and then we can start having some hard conversations about is it or isn't it, or should I or shouldn't I, and all of that, right? And that comes from sex outside of marriage. I mean, there's all sorts of things that happen, right? That the Bible says is really, I think, mainly saying it's not good for you. It's not good for you. It doesn't further your walk with me, and therefore it's not good for you.
Right.
Anything outside of faith is considered sin. So even doing the right thing for the
Outside of
wrong
faith.
reason
Yep.
is still sin. Even if you're feeding the poor and doing all of those things, but you're doing it to glorify yourself and not really help them. I'm not even talking about glorifying him and going that further step, but you're just doing it to make yourself look good. That's still sin.
Yeah.
So we really have to start. I don't focus on sin a lot. I'm not a huge sin-focused person. I think the world beats us up enough with what we're doing wrong. So I don't think I have to tell you what you're doing wrong. I think you know through
Yeah.
the Spirit, especially what you are doing right and what you're not doing wrong. I'm not a thought policeman. I'm not here to tell you how to think. I'm telling you what I think God thinks.
Yeah.
And I could be wrong. In fact, I've been wrong. So it's important. We can create iron sharpens iron. That's another big one that's out in the Christian community. That's true, though.
That's true.
So then we're going to scoot over to Philippians 3 through 4, which says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others." That is counterintuitive to what everybody's told in the world today. It is completely opposite. But why? What is the end result of that statement? If I'm looking out for Amy, and Joy's looking out for Amy, and Joy's mom is looking out for Amy, and Brett's looking out for Amy, does Amy need to look out for Amy as much? Her needs are taken care of. She's got food, she's got a house, she's got shelter, she's got cars, and she's got the things that she needs, because what's Amy doing?
Looking out for others.
Amy's taking care of the needs of Brett and Joy and her mom and me. And as we take care of each other, which is why we love our neighbors, why we do those things, as we do that, this is what right looks like. This is what the new heaven is going to look like. You're not going to have to take care of yourself. You're not going to have to do that because somebody else is taking care of you. The Lord is taking care of you. Your fellow heaven dwellers are taking care of you. You don't have to worry. And so it's this homogeneous, everybody's taking care of everybody else. It's almost like, and then I'm a pretty hard conservative for the most part, so for me to say this is a little weird, but absolute, actual communism, if you take human beings out of the mix, is probably kind of what that looks like, right? Communism really is supposed to take everything in and then distribute it equally back out. But equal to us is perverted. Who should get and who shouldn't get is perverted. And so that doesn't work. Just like true democracy doesn't fully work, capitalism doesn't fully work, socialism doesn't, they all have these gotchas that involve
Yeah.
me getting mine, right? There's a movie called Remember the Titans. And there's this, and it's a great movie because it's actually based on a true story of some racial tension that was going on back then. But an African-American fellow linebacker and a white linebacker, all-American linebacker. The white all-American linebacker is the captain. The African-American is an all-star linebacker as well. And the guy said, you're not pulling your weight. I'm constantly having to pull your weight. Every time you do X, it's leaving me out to dry, and I'm taking punishment for it. You need to be better, and blah, blah, blah. And he turns to him and says, attitude reflect leadership, Captain. You know, the rest of your white buddies are not blocking for Rev and all this other stuff, so no, I don't trust you, so I'm gonna get mine. I'm gonna take care of me and myself. And that's really what's going on today, right? We have that still today. None of us trust anyone for the most part, and so we're gonna do everything we can to take care of ourselves first, and then start taking care of others because it makes us feel good about ourselves. We have to flip that. Now here's the kicker, and this is the part where Christ really comes into play, because when you do that, the rest of the world is not on board with it.
That's true.
So I want to be very clear about this. When you make the decision to do what God's doing for you, to serve, to really take yourself down to here and put everybody else up here, you will get kicked in the teeth
Multiple times.
on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And what you have to do, and the Bible talks about this, right? Die to your,
Self.
and pick up your,
Cross.
and follow me. He says, when the world hates you, remember it hated me first.
Yeah.
He's warning us that when you choose this lifestyle, it's not puppy dogs and rainbows. It's a war.
Yeah.
And it is a battle. But the great thing about it is, and I'm getting a little charismatic speaky here and I don't like that, but
I love it.
the great thing about it is that we win.
Yeah.
Preach it.
And every time you show kindness to somebody who's not showing kindness to you, and you continually do that, I've seen people being won into that lifestyle. It starts breaking down a barrier in their own, like, hey, somebody is looking out for me. And this person is doing what they say they do. And this person does care about me. And it starts changing the narrative in their mind so that those barriers get broken down. And all of a sudden you see this amazing thing happen. They connect with God and they actually start having a relationship with the Lord. Not just saying that they're a Christian, but are actually in communion with the Lord. You start seeing all of a sudden they start treating people a little bit better. They start doing things a little bit differently. They start getting their teeth kicked in on a regular basis. You have to encourage them through that. And that's why we're to encourage one another, because this isn't an easy walk. He actually never says this is going to be an easy walk, and I've said this a million times, and Amy's probably said it as well. The disciples are dead except for John. They died way before their time.
Yep.
They died in some cases horrible, horrible deaths. So the gospel isn't about you getting yours. The gospel is about making sure that everybody doesn't get what they deserve.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't want that for people. If you do, then you need to really seek the Lord and find out why you want that for anybody. Because it's the people that have supposedly seen it have described things that are unimaginable. And so I don't want that for anybody. I don't care what you've done. If you're Hitler, fine. You know, if you can accept the Lord and take his grace and do all of that, he probably couldn't. But if he did, he deserves to be in heaven just as much as I do. I don't want him there. You shouldn't want that for anybody. I know it feels like they deserve it. And he killed millions of people, right? it's not that he was a good man. He probably could have been at some point. I don't know. That's not for me to decide. But we really have to grasp the fact that this salvation is for everybody.
It's for everybody.
And it's really hard when you start putting titles on it, like Stalin, who murdered, I think, 20 million of his own people. Hitler. Pick your favorite politician that you don't like. You shouldn't want that for anybody. Salvation is for them as well. So it's very important. And the only way we can do that is deny ourselves, right? It says that in Matthew 16, 24 and 26. It also says it in Revelations. You hear that a lot. They overcame by the word of their
Testimony.
and by
The blood of the Lamb.
and loving themselves even unto death.
Ah, yeah. Let's say that.
Not loving themselves even
Not
unto
loving.
death. So denying themselves and picking up their cross and letting the cards fall. We have Christians all around the world right now dying in other countries, being slaughtered because they're Christian.
Yeah.
We live a very sheltered life here in the United States as far as Christianity is concerned. We live in a protected life that we should be feel very privileged
Yeah.
that we have, because it can be taken away. And in fact, that's what's going on in the evangelical community right now. They're so used to gathering. And now because of this and the separation that has to occur and everything else and the limits that are being put on by some governors, they feel like their right to worship is being taken away from them. And so they're not rallying against COVID, they're not rallying against anything that's going on, really. They're rallying against the fact that something's being taken away from them that they feel the right to have. Well, I get it. I understand that. You don't need to be in a building to worship God. You really don't.
Right.
You don't even necessarily need to be in community to do it. The community is really to talk about, if you're really walking a godly lifestyle and you're not in a community and you're getting your teeth kicked in, probably not going to make the walk. You're going to stall out and become lukewarm, not really want to help people, will kind of every once in a while, because it's hard. And if you don't have somebody saying, hey, I know this is hard, I know you feel like you're doing it alone, I know that your people are turning on you, whatever it is, right? If you don't have someone saying that's okay, if you still feel like God's calling you to whatever, right? And I have this conversation with lots of friends, including myself, then you don't have that. So community is horribly important in this walk. You can't do it alone. You can't do it without your fellow Christian or man, woman, right? But you can commune with the Lord without other people, and so you don't have to commune. So what the point here is that we in America have become very accustomed to the fact that we can worship and pretty much do whatever we want as far as how we gather. That is not the case in most other places of the world. Most places have what's called freedom to worship, not freedom of worship. And so you are allowed to worship, but you have to do it in your own home. And you can't encourage anybody else to come in your home to do it unless they are already. So, you get apostasy and all sorts of things that go on in other religions that prevent you from doing that. Some of them are death penalties for doing.
Yeah.
So we don't have that here. And I think we take it for granted a lot. In fact, a lot of the rest of the world of Christians say, I wish Christians would embrace more in America would embrace more what they have. Because we don't have that. We have to fight every day to be Christians. You guys kind of just can be. And there's other battles going on that I think we diminish in our minds. Like the battle between Christian communities. That is, the devil can't hit us by directly, persecuting us and throwing us in chains. And although that could change, you will be surprised at how easily that can change. If you look in history
And how fast.
and you take freedoms and how fast they can be taken away by a few people, you're fooling yourself if you think our Constitution is a barrier to that. It is a guide that helps keep us on our path, but you're kind of fooling yourself if you think for a moment somebody can't come in and take that away in a pretty quick way, and sometimes in a way you wouldn't even notice it was happening. It's subtle, right? Subtle changes. Again, getting a little too political, but it can, right? And so we just have to be very thankful for where we are as Americans and use that freedom to help our Christians and brothers and sisters who, a lot of people say, well, why are you sending money to China? Or why are you sending money to Japan? Or why are you sending money to Serbia and Syria? And I've got friends on the ground in Syria, and their life is in danger pretty much every day. So I can't do that. I don't feel called to do that, but I'm going to send them some money to help them.
Yeah.
$100 a month, $50 a month can feed a lot of these refugees over there for days,
Yeah.
if not months, right? So, you know, a friend and I were talking about our money, and money is something that Americans, whether you think you've got a lot of it or not, actually have quite a bit of compared to the rest of the not just the whole world, because you start pulling tribal countries and stuff into that. Well, they don't really even have money. Their currencies is goats and fields and people, unfortunately. So you can't really, that's an unfair comparison. I'm a data analyst, for those of you who don't know. So bad data correlation for me, it triggers me. Because I'm like, well, that's not what that says. You're missing all this other stuff to actually make that correlation. Just like good Bible etiquette and good Bible teaching is 3-point confirmation. Which says in order for you to establish something as a biblical truth, you have to be able to find it in 3 different places in the Bible to actually say that same thing contextually.
Yeah.
Not just say the same thing, but actually in context. So that's good kind of Bible study etiquette and self-teaching etiquette. When you're looking at the Bible and you go, oh, that's cool, make sure that's cool somewhere else in the Bible.
Right.
Well, the same is true for data correlation. You need 3 points of data, of not 2, because anything correlates a long time. Anything. So there's a site out there called Bad Data Correlations. If you go look at it, you'll see some bad time correlations of people linking one thing to another that look like it. If you look at a graph, they all correlate, but they have nothing to do with each other. Back to my point. So, but if we take the rest of the world, the rest of what I would call like the rest of the 7, right, the big 7, we make more money than anybody else as American citizens. And so we need to be mindful. Can I let go of a $5 coffee twice a day during the week to help somebody else in another country who is just trying to figure out how to feed their kid? It's not a put a guilt trip in it. It's just a kind of, well, I say I don't have money, but I got cell phones, I got cars, I got a roof over my head, I've got Xboxes, I've got guitars, I've got things that I don't necessarily. I'm not saying you shouldn't have those things. I have what you have, but realize that if you really want to start helping people, there's people in our own community. You'd be surprised at how many kids in our own community go hungry every week because their parents are too proud to actually take anything. And those are communities we can reach out to as well as a church. I mean, there's things that can be done here in America, but I think we want the big thing all the time, and it's the little things that will bring all of this together. I'm rambling a little bit, but so money, and this is something that no pastor likes to talk about. And Amy, you can see Amy's getting uncomfortable. Why is he talking about money?
I talk about it all the time.
She's not. But,
No, it's just with it.
you know, there's all these things about tithing, about giving money to the church, giving money to your fellow man, helping people. And, you know, Jesus says, and I'm going to get into this in just a second, but Jesus says, you know, show me your money and I'll show you your heart, basically. So basically, where your money is, there's your heart.
Yeah.
Now, what I see is a lot of folks getting up on stage using that to encourage people. Because honestly, if I'm standing in the audience and you say, show me your heart, or show me your money, and you show me your heart, and you're not tithing to the church at the point, then what you're really saying to me is, you don't care about this building because you're not giving me your money. Right? And so that's an internal process that creates a unintentional, I don't think it's being done intentionally in most cases. I think it's just big churches take money. It's just a fact. It takes money to support a 19,000, 20,000, 50,000 square foot building. This building, Now, they may own it outright, I don't know.
They do.
Yeah. But in general, if you were to rent something like this, or buy it and pay payments on it, it's not cheap. You're talking, I don't know,
Lots of
probably
money.
$15,000 a month for the mortgage,
Easy.
give or take. I don't know what the real estate's like in this area, probably higher than that in this area. So it takes money, and so I would never tell you to tithe to a church. That's what the tithe is for. But what I would say is, if whatever the ministry is, whatever the building is, find something to support. And if it's $1, nobody's gonna get mad at you for putting $1 into a bucket, or for sending $10 to an organization or a charity. They'll take it, and they're not gonna be like, oh my God. Some people might, some people will judge it, but that's not on you, that's on them.
Right.
But supporting the things that you believe in with your wallet does say something. It does speak that is more important to you than your money. I've had people in situations where I was very financially in trouble take care of me, and it was super appreciated. And I've taken care of other people when they're in the same situation. So that's important. It's important for us to support each other. You know, I have folks that are like, I don't like big bands, and these churches that put on all these big shows and do all this great worship music and all this stuff. I don't support that. They're spending their money in the wrong place. And then I go to their house and they're worshiping and they're listening to Bethel.
Yeah.
This song, Jesus Culture. Oh, it's so anointed. It's the best thing I've ever heard. Well, that's double-mindedness, folks.
Yeah.
You can't have what they're creating without money. That takes money.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying, hey, if you want to take 10% of your income and give it to deeper waters, more power to you. I'm sure it will be used in a very good way. If you want to take 10% of your income, send it overseas to support people who are starving, more power to you. But do something. Do something with your wallet when you can. It says the widow gave 2 pence, right? 2 pennies. But she gave everything she had. So it was worth more than the thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
We get in a lack mentality. Oh, it's only $1. What's that going to do? God can take that dollar spiritually.
Yep.
And do more than you possibly can think He can do with it. And sometimes that act of spiritual obedience will cause somebody else to go, you know what? I just feel like doing something. Write a check. Next thing you know, Amy's got a $20,000 check in her. Now, this isn't prosperity gospel. This isn't, if you do this, you're going to get that. But God does do those things with those things. Spiritually, it creates a tidal wave of heavenly finances that can occur by somebody just being obedient to what they're being asked to do by God. It's not a compulsion thing. It's not a giving thing. I lately have not been giving what I want, but that's changing. So we lose, again, it's just the little things. We lose sight of the little things we can do to change things spiritually. So praying, and I'm going to kind of sum this up now, right? If you want to bring up the last slide, which I think is everything. One more. There we go. I didn't realize I left the other one in there. So all of these things that we do, some of them little, some of them big, they all compound into selflessness. And as you get into a rhythm of that, things around you will start changing. It's amazing. If you've ever been to like a big Christian conference, like a healing conference, or the amount of spiritual energy around was incredible. But I actually watched the city of Portland, which I'm in, or was up until COVID, every weekend. I'd go down there and we minister to the homeless with a great lady. That's a wonderful ministry too. If you want to support it, she's been doing it for 7 years. Absolutely worth sinking money into. She's very diligent, only spends what is reasonable to spend. She's put people in hotels for a night of her own money, just to get them off the street because it was a couple degrees above zero and they couldn't make it into a shelter. So, and there's risk there, right? They could damage the hotel, and it's on her credit card, so then she's going to pay for that too. So it's just a warm heart for people who doesn't really care about those kind of consequences, and so it's certainly somebody that we support. But and if you want that information, I can get it to you. But the point is as you do these things, and as you love people, and as you love your enemy, and start praying peace over them and good things over them, it changes the spiritual atmosphere. It's something that we don't, as a society, supernatural, doesn't exist or exists to a point.
Right.
And unfortunately, some of the things that I did when I was younger, before I was saved, I was very exposed to the supernatural world. I have no denial of its existence. You will never convince me that it's not there and it's in my head. It's not possible. I am that firm on what's there and what isn't. But the things that you do, and I even mean speaking stuff over yourself spiritually is harmful as well. So this thing of selflessness, it does not mean, and I meant to say this at the beginning and at the end, because a lot of people don't make it to the end, is that self-care is horribly important. I'm not saying don't take care of yourself. I'm not saying don't take care of yourself mentally. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is weigh that with other people's needs as well. And take care of them if you can, but you don't necessarily have to do it to your own detriment. There are ways to be healthy in both places.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, mental health is something right now that's very hard for a lot of people because of COVID. So I'm not saying don't take care of yourself. Reach out if you're not feeling right. If you're having suicidal thoughts, please talk to somebody. But selflessness is important, and as you do that, these things, and all of a sudden the atmosphere changes. So if you've been to one of these big conferences, we were downtown at a Power and Love conference on this Todd White. I don't know if you know who he is, but they get you. They take you in for a couple hours. They get you kind of aligned spiritually with how to engage with the Lord, how to hear from God. Right? And there's a process of doing that, and then you spend an hour or two out in the city talking to people, not just homeless, but anybody, praying, letting God lead you and stuff. And then you come back and you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again. 2 hours in, an hour out. 2 hours in, 2 hours out for lunch. 2 hours in, hour out. 2 hours in, go home, come back the next day. And you do this for 4 days. Well, by the second day, we had cops on the street going, "What's going on?" Because spiritually things were changing them. The city was calming down, right? And by the third day, the head of security at Lloyd Center, which, if you know the area, Lloyd Center is not a calm place. The head of security there was asking the conference folks, "What's going on? Why? What is happening?" Right? Because there had been no instances in that day. And the day before there was like one. Normally there's 10, 15, 20 a day. They were having a lot of problems at the time. Same thing with the cops. We don't understand. People are being compliant. They're not being combative. It's because the Holy Spirit was down there with 4,000 Christians doing what they're supposed to do. That is what happens when the body comes together and does what God's asking us to do. It changes the environment. I can't tell you how many places I've walked into, and please don't take this the wrong way. When I got there, they weren't going so good. Once I was there, it got better and stayed really successful until I moved out. It has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with God's Spirit being around me, and the enemy can't stand up against it. Now, the enemy can take it out by changing people's narrative in their mind, and that's usually what happens. The enemy will come in and attack. So, for example, if you're feeling like Amy's neglecting you for whatever reason, and the narrative in your head is, well, she doesn't care about me, she doesn't love me, she doesn't care what happens to me, she doesn't, whatever the narrative is. And this is true for anybody, not just Amy. Again, Amy's a safe example. I know Amy enough to know that's absolutely not true. And honestly, most of the people that are coming to this church right now should know that as well. And if you're getting that narrative in your head, that narrative is probably coming from the enemy, not from God. And so change the narrative. You don't have to, even if you don't have the confidence to talk to the person, change the narrative in your mind first. She doesn't love me, she doesn't care, she doesn't love me, she doesn't care. That's going to take your own mental state down, but it's spiritually, in the spiritual realm, what that does, I believe, is that as I speak death over people, the enemy has minions.
Yeah.
Okay, it has demons. I believe that. If you don't, we can talk.
Oh, we believe that.
The enemy has demons, and they're around.
Mhm.
They're not in here now. They're not allowed, but they're around. They're listening. And if I start thinking harmful thoughts about somebody, they don't love me, they don't care. They don't love me, they don't care. They don't love me, they don't care. now I'm mad at her, now I don't care about her. Then what happens is that enemy comes around to Amy and starts whispering in her ear. Ryan doesn't care about you. Ryan doesn't like you. Ryan really isn't supporting you. Ryan isn't doing this. Ryan isn't doing blah, blah, blah. It just whispers it into her spirit. And then it happens from now, Joy's doing it, and Mom's doing it, or whoever, right? I know I don't think you guys are doing it now, but that's what happens. In the spiritual realm, as you speak death, then the bad guys are allowed to go speak death over that person. If you speak life over them, then the angels are ministering and speaking life over them. It sends spiritual health to that person, speaking life and praying good prayers over them. Sometimes they can't accept it, and you're not responsible for that.
Right.
But the reality, I think, personally, is that as you speak life into something, it changes. And the more you speak death into it, and I'm guilty of that, I'm not absolving myself of that at all.
Yeah.
But I've seen the difference between when speaking death in my prayers, and sometimes death looks like praying for them, but praying for them kind of shallowly, which we kind of talked about. Oh, please save them from their sin and their death and their, I mean, sometimes you can mean that, and it's absolutely legitimate. Most of the time, it's pointing out the fact that they're hurting you, and you want God to tell them to stop hurting you. Rather than, God, make their life better, make it so they don't have to hurt people, feel whatever void or whatever's causing them that pain, take it away from them so that they don't have to feel that way. God, I could not imagine feeling the way they're feeling right now all the time. Help them take that away from them. Those kind of prayers start speaking life, not only over your own kind of unhealthy internal narrative, but speaks life over them. And if you do that and they still walk away and they still do something because they can't get out of their own space, that's not on you.
Right.
If anything, it's on God. But he has his reasons, so you don't want to blame him either, right? In fact, you don't actually want to blame Satan necessarily. And we can go into that some other time. But even Michael would not accuse Satan. Michael's the archangel of heaven, right? So
Yeah.
he wouldn't even accuse Satan directly. Now, we have some different rules because of who we are. But in general, I would not even go against a principality without God saying it's appropriate to do so. And a lot of people do. A lot of people pray against principalities and things, and they actually bring some harm onto themselves.
Yeah.
Because that authority has a right to be where they are at the time, and you're praying against. It's like telling a cop that you can't, I can do whatever I want. I can throw bricks through windows. Well, it's against the law. So their job is not to make a decision one way or another. And obviously, some of them don't do a very good job. But their job is to enforce whatever the law says. They don't actually they're not supposed to have options. If you break the law, they arrest you and they let a lawyer and a judge determine whether or not you actually broke the law. Their job is not, it's enforcement of the law. It's not to make or to say what's true or not. Now, unfortunately, some break that.
Right.
I'm not going to get into that, but we have to change the narrative. That's the end goal. Change the narrative that's going on here for you. Speak life over people and help other people, and kind of sacrifice some of your own to help them. Eventually, the hope is, and then it will, right, when Christ comes, at the very least, then that's a whole reciprocal thing. And so that's really the goal for selflessness, is just stop thinking about yourself so much. I know it's a hard thing to do, because we have worries and we have stress and we have a lack of kind of full belief that God's really going to pull through. And so that in itself is kind of a lack of trust for the Lord. And so I think it's just important for us to start working on our own internal narratives. Not necessarily from what am I working on? I'm not trying to teach Amy how to be a better Christian. That's her salvation that she needs to work out. What I am trying to do is make sure that my narrative about Amy is correct and is healthy. Even if she's messing up, because God sees her messing up.
Yeah.
And he's not smiting her, right? He's not throwing lightning bolts down at her and wiping her out for messing up. So I certainly should not be throwing words at her that are lightning bolts that are smiting her spirit, right? If God doesn't feel the need to do it, then I shouldn't be doing it either. And that's the thing I think we miss. We don't trust the Holy Spirit to do his job. Somehow because of like Galatians 2 or Galatians 6, we think it's our responsibility to change people. But that's not what it actually says, right? It says to point out the fact that they're doing something wrong, but you have to be in a relationship with them to do that. So change the narrative in your prayers, when you're praying for somebody who's done something wrong to you. I mean, you obviously have good prayers for the people that do, I don't have to reinforce that. But if somebody's doing wrong to you, or has done wrong to you, then pray for them as well, that changes, that their heart changes, that they don't need to, whatever the harm was, right? They don't need to do that anymore. They can find God and release out of that. And it's important to remember last, because I know I'm running long, is that forgiveness and forgiving people for the things they've done does not make what they did okay. And I think that's I mean, I'm sure everybody in this room has heard it a million times, everybody watching has heard it a million times, but hearing it and letting it sink in are two different things. You are responsible for you, God is responsible for them, and they are responsible for them, and God is responsible for you. That's it. You are not responsible for other people, but you should love and help other people as much as possible. So it's a weird kind of double negative, right? That says, don't worry about other people, what they're doing, but help them and do everything you can to support them. But you can do both. It's actually possible. So support people. Find a way to love people that are hard to love. Find a way to help people that are hard to love. And the world will change around you if you're looking at it. You'll start noticing that change in people. So that's it. Just be selfless. And the world will change, but we all have to do it. And the more Christians that do it, the more impact it'll have on the environment around us. So, thank you very much.